Hello and welcome back to Mastering Flat Design. In this lesson, we're going to create a drop-down menu for our services navigation item. We don't need drop-downs for any of the rest of them, but I do want to include it for the services item. So we're going to start using the rounded rectangle tool, and I want to align the left edge of this drop-down to the left edge of the services button. So one easy way to do that is let's go back to the move tool for a moment. I'm going to right click on the background for the services button, and then we're going to click on that layer, services BG, to select it. And then with that layer selected, we can drag out a guide from our rulers, and it should snap to the left edge of the selected layer. And now we can use that guide to create our new item. So we're going to go back to the rounded rectangle tool. For our fill color, I'm going to select the color selector here, and I'm going to assign the fill color a value of F7, 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 which is a very, very light gray color, almost white. And you'll notice I accidentally changed the services button there. Let's Command Z, undo that. Well, first we need to close this, and then Command Z, or Control Z if you're using a PC to undo that. And let's collapse the nav buttons here. And let's create a new layer above the dividers group, like so. And then let's change our options now that we've got a new layer selected. So we'll create a fill color again of F7, F7, F7. And then for our stroke, we're going to use a value of AD, AD, AD. And we're going to give it a 3-point stroke, as we can see here. Also, since we're rounding the corners here, we need to define how much we want to round them by. And I want to change this value here to 4 pixels. So then I'm going to click somewhere around here and drag over about halfway across the blog button, maybe even a little further than that, about 240 pixels wide, and I want it to be about 120 pixels tall. So that should work just fine. So there's the initial basic shape of our drop down. One more thing I want to do here, let's nudge it up a little bit so that it's a little closer to the services button. And another thing I want to do, I'm going to hit Command H to turn off our guides. I want to put a little bit of a triangle on the top portion here that's kind of overlapping the services button so that we can tell that this particular drop down comes from the services button. So with that rounded rectangle layer still selected here, first of all, let's give it a different name. Let's double click on that layer name and call it drop down BG for drop down background. And then I'm going to go back to the rounded rectangle tool. And up here at the top where we have all of our shape options, one of these options is this little square right here. And that square, if we click on this drop down, means that when we draw a new shape here, it's going to create it on a new layer. I don't want it to do that. I want to combine these two shapes together. So I'm going to click on Combine Shapes. Now, before we draw it over this rectangle, I'm going to draw it over here to the side. And I'm going to draw it a little bit larger than it needs to be, about like so. And then you'll notice after we're done drawing it and we release, all of those anchor points are selected. So I'm going to hit Command T or Control T on a PC to transform those selected points. And I'm just going to rotate them around. So I'm going to hover my cursor just outside those transformation points till we get this rounded double arrow. And then we'll click and drag down. And if we hold on to Shift, we can do that in 15-degree increments. So I want to rotate it 45 degrees. Like so, and then hit enter on the numeric keypad to apply that transformation. And you'll see here that it says this operation will turn a live shape into a regular path. If you're using Photoshop CC, which is what I'm using here, then when you create a rounded rectangle, you can actually go back in and change the roundness of the corners later on if it's still a live shape. But if we turn it into a regular path, we won't be able to change the roundness of those corners anymore. Well, I don't need to worry about the roundness of the corners anymore. I have it where I want it to be, so I'm just going to click on Yes, and it applies that transformation for us. So then we can hit A to switch to the direct selection tool. You'll notice these points are still selected, so I'm just going to drag, with those points still selected, I'll drag one of those points, and you'll notice that all of them come with it. And I'll just drag it over here. Once I get that in place, I can just nudge it around with the arrow keys, and you'll see that it's combining those shapes together. We're not getting that stroke all the way around the second square that we created. Instead, it's combining these shapes together and treating them like one shape. And we can see that even better if we hit V now to switch to the Move tool. You'll see that it combines those two shapes together and gives us the the end result, and it just puts a stroke around the entire end result. So that's our background. Let's go ahead and put that inside a group, because we're also going to put some text here. So I'm going to hold on to Command Shift and Option, or Control Shift Alt if you're using a PC, and click on the Create New Group icon down here at the bottom of the layer stack, and we'll give this a group name of, actually let's call it Services Dropdown instead of just Dropdown, in case you decide to create dropdowns for more than one of these items. So we'll call that group Services Dropdown, click on OK, and then inside that group we'll create our text. And I'm going to put some brightly colored bullet points for each menu item in this dropdown. And I'm going to do that using the ellipse tool. And we're going to change our fill color. First of all, make sure you don't have any vector shapes or layers selected right now. And we don't. We have this folder selected. And then we're going to change our fill color. I'm going to eyedropper the background for the home button. We're going to use that bright coral color for the color for our bullets. And then for our stroke, I'm just going to turn that off. We don't need a stroke for this. And that should do it. So now I'm going to create our shape. No larger than about 10 pixels by 10 pixels. V to switch to the move tool, and then we can nudge it around. And I'll just leave this one here for now until we get our text in place and see how far our text needs to be spaced. So then we'll add our text. I'm going to hit T to switch to the text tool. And we're going to add 3 items to the dropdown here for each of the services that Jerry Clutterbuck offers. So we're going to have web design, graphic design, and video production. So I'm going to select Centany Regular, which is the font that we got from Google Fonts earlier in the series. Centany Regular 18 point. And for the fill color, I'm going to select AD, which is the same color we used for the stroke around the edges of that dropdown. So we'll click on OK, and then we'll click inside that box somewhere, and we'll type in our text. So we have web design. I'll just hit enter to go to the next line. Graphic design, return, and video production. And then we'll hit enter on the numeric keypad to apply those changes. V to switch to the move tool, nudge this over, and I want these lines of text to be spaced out a little bit more. So I'm going to hit T to go back to the text tool. I'm going to click up here to open up the character panel, which opens up over here in our panel sets. And we're going to just increase the line height here until we have those lines spaced out about as far as we want them. And for my purposes here, I've got it around 29 point, and that looks pretty good. So then we can go back to this ellipse layer, which is that orange bullet point we have here. Command J on a Mac or Control J on a PC to duplicate that layer. And then I'm just going to, with the move tool selected, nudge that new copy down next to the graphic design item. And then Command J to create another copy, and then nudge that copy down as well. And just nudge it into place with your arrow keys. And that looks pretty good. So there's our drop down menu for our services navigation item. Now this drop-down is not going to be visible by default, so I'm just going to collapse that folder and then click on the eye icon next to it to make it invisible. We don't want to be able to see that by default, but we want our coders, whoever's going to turn this into HTML code, we want them to know what that's supposed to look like. So we've created it here, and they have the option to turn it off and on as they will, but again, I don't want it to be visible by default whenever they open the file. So there we go. Now we're done with our navigation. So I'm going to save this as flatdesign05.psd. And with that done, we'll move on with the next video. Thank you for watching.